All week, we've been discussing the upcoming elections later this month. Well, today, it's the turn of the Labour Party to launch their campaign. And in a moment, we'll be speaking to Sadiq Khan, the Shadow Justice Secretary. But first, here's Giles with news of today's policy announcement.
Yes, Joe. To accompany their elections launch, Labour have announced policy details for private landlords and tenants. This morning, Ed Miliband said housing costs were one of the biggest causes of the cost of living crisis, that phrase again, and warned that increasing numbers of people face terrible insecurity at the hands of unscrupulous landlords. Well, here's how he wants to solve the problem. In a being forced out of their homes by huge rent hikes, landlords would be restricted to one rent review a year and required by law to keep it below a set level. Details of how that ceiling will be calculated are yet to be resolved, but it's thought it could be based on average rents across an area or inflation. Ed Miliband also wants to legislate to ban the charges imposed on tenants when they sign a rental agreement. Now, these fees average around £350 per person. They can go up to as much as £500. Tenants would get a 3-year deal as long as they paid the rent on time and were not guilty of antisocial behaviour in the first 6 months. Landlords could only serve them with 2 months' notice to leave with good reason. Now listen to these good reasons: rent arrears, antisocial behaviour, breaches of the tenancy agreement, or because the landlord needed the property to live in, wanted to refurbish it, or wanted to sell it. Lots of exemptions there. So, good news for tenants and landlords? Well, not everyone thinks so. The Adam Smith Institute says it's one of the worst policy decisions in the history of modern British politics. We can speak to Sam Bowman, who's research director there. Sam, you have said that only bombing would be worse than rent control. That's pretty bold. Why do you say that?
Well, I'm quoting a socialist Swedish economist, and the reason this is such a bad idea is because it's one of the few issues in economics that unites left and right. Virtually everybody in economics, this is a poll found 95% of economists think rent control is a bad idea and harms renters. So it really amazes me that Labour is going down this way. Now, the proposals that they're outlining aren't as bad as the classical rent controls that we associate with absolute destruction of cities. It's more like petty vandalism. There are lots of studies. There was a study in the 1970s that found that rent-controlled buildings, controlled in the way Labour is proposing, were 7% worse in terms of the quality than similar comparable buildings that weren't controlled. And 3 years later, we're 13% worse. So rent controls like this have a very, very bad, very, very quick effect on the quality of property. I don't think they help renters either, though.
You've got there a theoretical problem with it. You think it's a bad idea. Practicalities in what they're proposing, is it the exemptions that weakens it? What is it that takes out? Is it the fact that they haven't calculated how they'd set the rent control?
Well, no, it's an empirical problem. As we have looked at the world, these make things worse. But think about it. The only way that this can help renters is if rents rise more quickly than everybody anticipates. Landlords are already going to price in the expected rise in rents to the initial rent. So renters do gain if rents increase faster than everybody's anticipating. However, they lose if rents fall or rents don't increase as quickly as people are anticipating. So it's pretty much a potluck for renters. And what this also does is it ties renters into a location. Because landlords now have to increase rents significantly when they're setting new leases, people who are already in reasonably lower, relatively lower places, relatively cheaper places, are discouraged and find it much harder to move around. And we know that David Blanchflower, the economist, has done quite a lot of work on this, that lower housing mobility is associated with higher unemployment because people find it harder to move around to find new jobs. So I worry that this kind of proposal, even though it sounds nice, will end up really hurting renters. It will hurt the quality of the place that they live in, and it will probably reduce supply and even increase unemployment. So I think across the board, we have to listen to economists and we have to look at the evidence that we have.
Sam, we will do that. Sam Bowman from the Adam Smith Institute, thank you very much indeed.